It's all good.
All right, this is Knotwork.
Yeah. Hello. We're trying to, because this is so young, so new. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to be most comfortable. And so today we're sitting on couches, which is cool. In
Yeah,
the usual spot where we have our chat. So
right. Going back to the origin story is that this is just an extension of Mike and I having dialogue as friends and exploring different topics, which take place in a comfortable setting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We've spent a lot of hours sort of bonding and getting to know each other in this spot. So it made sense. I think we did a couple of them in the library, which is really cool because just in that setting, in that room,
Yeah,
it's awesome. You just look
sure.
around and see all these texts and
Mm-hmm.
and and whatnot, and but I don't know. It felt a little stiff.
Yeah, this feels much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt a little bit like work in the other room.
Yeah.
And it's kind of
Yeah,
the opposite point of
right.
of this. So, but yeah. So we're trying this out, and we don't have anything planned.
Okay, so but now I do
You
is
do.
I want to hear more about your experience from listening. Maybe you can give everybody a kind of
Yeah.
background on what you were doing this week
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this podcast.
So my job is pretty. It's I take advantage of the time that it gives me. I work at a small family-run wood shop, and so I spend a lot of time to myself, and it's just woodworking. So it's there's just something about that sort of a thing, and there's a cool zen to it, and so I spend a lot of time listening to various things, different scriptures, a lot of different lectures from different teachers of all schools of thought and things like that. But I found this YouTube channel, and I should mention them just because, I mean,
Gonna give them a shout out.
yeah, exactly. um, it's the channel name is Samaneri Jayasara, and that's spelled Samaneri Jayasa with a line above it, which I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Where the origins of that is. So please forgive my ignorance. And then R.A. Jayasara. And what they are these really cool meditations on a bunch of different sacred texts. And there's this playlist of 72 videos that I started, and I've just been listening to this at work, for 10 plus hours a day, and they're meditations, so it kind of pulls you into that state. But they've got the Advaita Vedanta, they've got the Rubu Gita, chapter 26, which is Ramana Maharshi teaching of some sort, I believe,
Oh,
or
okay.
at
I
least
didn't
that's a
realize
credit.
that.
And so it's meditations on the Katha Upanishad, Maitri Upanishad, so like a lot, and it's been cool. So because of my job and because of that time that it gives me to listen to things like that, that's where a lot of that work for me takes place. Almost like probably 90% of it.
That's your practice.
That is my space. That is my place of practice. Yes. And but just I think what's so cool about these meditations is that, one, they're just that. So it's just excerpts, little chunks of these very powerful, words, but with a lot of space in between. So it really, you can kind of kind of mess with it a bit and sit with these things. And it was really cool for me because, you know, we met up last week. We didn't record it, but we had a
Yeah.
wild conversation.
Yeah.
And that kind of like put me in this headspace,
Mm-hmm.
like to start the week. You know, I left here feeling that sort of high of like,
Mm.
oh, you know, like, whoa, we're unpacking some really cool stuff
Yeah.
in our conversation together.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so I happened to stumble on that channel, and it helped me sort of stay in that space entire
Mm-hmm.
week.
Yeah, I was just looking through these teachings a little bit more, and a lot of these texts that they are speaking on or they're reading from is really what we study here. So many of them. Yeah. So it makes sense that it would feel like just an extension of, you know, what we're discussing,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe fine tuning it,
Yeah,
refining
yeah.
it. So
Well, and that's what's interesting too, is because like I don't spend. I'm not devoted to studying any particular text, and usually when I listen, I've got ADD from hell. So when I listen, my mind's kind of going all over the place. So it's, you know, that's a lot of the work, is just being able to bring it back and center it and things
sure.
like that,
Mm-hmm.
and just guide it back, which I, you know, that's part of what I do
Mm-hmm.
there. But typically when I listen to these things, I just kind of trust that it's hitting the subconscious. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not listening intently to the words, but I know I'm soaking it in somewhere and somehow.
Sure.
And I just trust that, you know.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of the things that I do here when I'm focusing my attention on it are very digestible, very understand, like at least to me, it's cool not having a background in studying a text, but being able to understand at least a bit,
Sure.
you know, because there's
Yeah, no, ideally it's done with a guru or your teacher, and you're sitting with them listening to the text there,
Mhm.
and they have a vision, and they were taught that text by their guru, and they're teaching it for a reason. And yeah, traditionally you just listen, but since you're in close proximity with a guru, there's opportunity for a question, dialogue about it,
Mhm.
unpacking it. And the guru should also understand where the student's mind is at too. So what's neat about a lot of the text too is that they can be unpacked differently upon where the student is at.
Right.
So
Right.
so the guru may just, one of the verses may just gloss over in a way in which there was a much greater depth in that particular verse, but knew that the student wasn't at a place to receive it.
Mhm.
So that can happen. So yeah, those kind of
helping find the stepping stones.
Yeah. So
just gentle guiding. But
and for us, these texts too are not just they are a means of knowing something that is not really available for any other means. So they're to be handled very well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. There's.
But you're right. I think that the words do what's being said in those Upanishad, at least like Katha Upanishad and some of those other texts I saw there, what's being said there is pointing out something that's not an object or not referable to an object. So when you listen to it, it just kind of escapes into you. It doesn't really.
Right. It's sort of.
It doesn't land in the same way.
No.
Like when I say the word apple, then both of us can have a shared understanding.
Right.
Cognitively, we can visualize an apple. Or I say tree.
Right.
Cow. Then I say self. Where does that land? Or consciousness.
Right. Right.
or limitlessness.
Yeah.
When you say those words, then what do you think?
There's
We have maybe some idea, like when I say limitlessness, I may have an idea of the sky or a vast ocean or something.
mhm.
But it's pointing out something that's not a thing. So
Right. It's
so I just said all that because I do think that there is, when you're talking about listening to it in a kind of subconscious level,
mhm.
it does affect that.
Yeah. Well, that's when I notice. I mean, if I'm doing that, it triggers a sort of state, a mental state.
Mm-hmm.
That that's where a lot of my sort of hard to explain experiment or experiences
Uh-huh.
or things tend to happen is in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But when I get there, and I'm listening to something that is centered around or centered with these particular topics that I'm that are in my head,
Mm-hmm.
usually just the top in whatever way, just the topic of God,
Yeah.
and what that means in
Mm-hmm.
that particular moment, or however I see it in that particular moment. And so that's what I'm spending my time looking at in my head while these things are playing, and I'm sort of drifting in and out of paying attention to it. But that's what's usually happening internally the whole time. But that's when those moments of when all those aha moments happen. That's when these important realizations or things that I need to see for whatever reason kind of pop out. And
Wow.
Lots of times it'll just be like a little whisper, like some sort of disembodied kind of a faint voice or something that I'll hear, because I'll be in a quiet enough, still enough place. But other times it'll just be like a vivid sort of imagination scene. But there's always something that there's always something that there's always a takeaway from it. There's always a lesson or something, important
Sure.
that happens.
Yeah, I think
So-
that's beautiful too, because though the teachings are timeless, that it's continually applied. Like as you're listening to that throughout your day, it's continually being applied to like what's unfolding in your life right now.
Yeah.
Which I feel that's what makes this path really beautiful, is that your sadhana is really just 24/7.
Ryan.
Re-
Yeah. As often as I can remember, which
yeah,
little by
remembering.
little, more and more,
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that's neat too that you're just highlighting on is that our means of knowing and how it's used, and like the whole process of I guess you could say the whole process of knowing God is through listening and creating a cognitive shift in your mind through words, which yes are limited, but they do have the ability to remove the wrong notions about ourselves,
right,
and let who you are flower and shine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when that happens, then really profound insights will come for whatever was needed.
Yeah.
In different ways. So, yeah, this is an interesting approach because these texts, a lot of them work in a kind of negative way, in a kind of way of just removing different limiting ideas or beliefs that we have about ourselves.
That can be a painful process. It really can be, because those are all the things that we cling to the most in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's good. Yeah. It is a death.
It is. It's more than one.
True.
Many, many. I mean, it's been a couple of very big ones for me in the last couple of years that I've legitimately equated to a death.
Yeah, I think we were actually, like, last time we met, we were kind of talking about the repercussions of that. Like, an end in a relationship, and then even after things settle, just...
The fallout.
Yeah, and also
Burning embers.
finding our mind taking a particular habit or pattern of
Yeah.
of protecting ourselves when we know that it's not needed anymore, but just having to manage that old habit or pattern.
Right. Yeah, and for me in those really dark moments too. But that's when that stuff shines through the clearest, because I mean, those are the times for me where I've gotten the most reflective.
Yeah.
Like, and I've asked the biggest questions. You know, but with a sense of like no real aggression, just tired. Like, what does this mean? And then that's when you start to see those patterns. That's when you start to see those cycles and all that stuff. And yeah, for me, the last year has been just a constant sort of a ruthless self-examination. Where are these blocks? What are they? Where do they come from? You know, and just pulling at all these loose threads all the time.
That's the inspiration for our name.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
The Knotwork.
Exactly. So untying the knot that you've spent so long winding yourself up into. But then as you do that, what I've noticed is that when you do find those blocks, there has to be, because there's this new developing sense of awareness and understanding about, you know, who and what you are, depending on what questions you're asking throughout this. You know, when at least for me, when I found those blocks, those things that really, you know, that you say with the help of the guru and the teacher, you know, those things can kind of come away maybe a bit easier, you know, and especially in regards to what the texts in scriptures say. But when I've noticed them, it's like hitting a brick wall internally. It's, you know, like my, without getting into explicit detail, you know, like, you know, some anger as part of the fallout of, you know, of a thing that I experienced, you know, about a year ago, just the ending of a relationship, and, you know, the anger that I was left with that. And you know, that's been, when I look at it, I can say it's a fascinating process, but it's been kind of stressful in the moment, because you know, how do I now see this block, this thing that demands attention, and how do I handle it without pushing back against it? Because the more I push back against it, the firmer it gets, the harder and more entrenched it gets, and the more demanding of your attention it becomes. And so that's where, you know, that's where I get lost in things like that. You know, and I don't know. I feel like, for me personally, and this is, you know, this is a personal admission, I think at this point I can definitely see how it would benefit me to have to be around a guru, to have a guru. In, you know.
It's for me, it's instrumental, and that may not be true for everyone, but I don't know how it's possible to not have a guide. Or I feel like it is possible, but if you really want to not reinvent the wheel and spend a lot of extra time going around, then yeah, I feel that that's you can save a lot of time and effort by being around somebody who's done it.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's several different ways for addressing those blocks. That's why we have certain disciplines like the yoga practice and things like that to address those at a more energetic level. That's one way that they can be managed. And then but what I'm finding too that was just not in my awareness for the longest time is that the more we understand what is, like I guess you were saying, the more awareness that's there, the more that we understand what is, some of these things just resolve themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
like I'm starting to understand, okay, there's a reason why I'm angry. And one, that gives yourself some sense of, like when you're on the spiritual path, that gives yourself some sort of compassion towards yourself. That,
right.
Oh, instead of feeling like I shouldn't be angry and I'm trying to fight it, I'm trying to remove it. Like, why do I have this anger? Oh, it's not out of order.
Right.
So
it has its, and that's
yeah,
what we were
there's a
talking about
purpose.
last time.
Yeah, there's
it
a
has its place.
Yes, it has its place, and then you can be more relaxed about it at least.
Mm-hmm.
Like of course, when anger is just happening, that doesn't allow for a lot of space.
Right.
But it's more manageable for sure with more understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one thing, and then that understanding keeps growing. Like part of the anger, seeing just all the ways in which it serves a purpose, in which it may no longer serve a purpose, gives you a lot of flexibility to manage it in a healthy way, or just give it a healthy outlet.
Right.
Convert it. That's more like energy work.
Sure.
Converting it into something else.
Transmutation.
Yeah.
Is what there's a sexy name for that, and a lot of the online spiritual community that I see. Transmutation. That's a fun word. But yeah, pretty much just means energetically taking something negative and turning it to a positive, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah, you could breathe it away.
Mm-hmm.
or just simply address the issue in a notebook where nobody gets hurt.
Right. Yeah.
There's ways to do that that are more skillful than how we may be conditioned to express anger.
Mm-hmm. But it seems to be with that growing awareness, though, that it's hard to escape the thought like that, yeah, anger is a very intense emotion, but it's obviously trying to show me something.
Yes.
It's obvious, not, yeah, you're talking about the process of sort of forgiving it and loving yourself, through it, giving yourself a sense of compassion or forgiveness, and accepting it. But it's weird because it's such an intense feeling to have when you have to look at it and go, what is it showing me? What do I have to learn?
Right.
Because I'm pissed. I don't have to learn anything. You suck. You pissed me off. Mm-hmm. Why do I have to look at myself? And that's where but you start doing it. That starts to happen.
It
more
does.
And more.
Yeah,
naturally too,
more,
which is weird.
Yes, so more and more inner space develops where there's some kind of space for you to witness that emotion arising in you, and then it not having to be a trail of reactions.
Right.
And yeah, that space will grow, and it will become easier to abide there. So I guess the key I was trying to highlight too was just, it doesn't really solve it, like you said, the pushback doesn't really solve it suppressing it. That right. Just compounds the problem.
Yeah.
For some reason, all I can picture right now is just, you know how how a dog makes that stance when they don't, like when they sense fear or they don't want to go back home, like on a really nice long walk, and their paws like
They just
plant,
freeze.
their paws like plant into the ground,
Yeah.
and their arms get really stiff,
Yeah.
and then somehow they like weigh twice as heavy as they do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah, like with my toddler. You know, he's light and I can move him around and do what I want when he's happy, but the second he gets mad and does that like dead weight thing,
yes.
he's suddenly 100 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so don't fight against that.
No, and it's so hard to remember that in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that is where a lot of frustration comes from too.
Sure.
Is because, you know, like if you are on a path that you acknowledge, and it is you know, it is for that sort of, you know, the purpose of that self-exploration and that growth and releasing things and developing a better knowing about who and what you are and things like that. You know, it gets frustrating when you don't catch yourself, because you're so, you know, like, I do all this work, I expect it to be easier now, and it's not. What the hell? And you know that, and it's like the dominoes of creating that resistance fall so quick, because, you know, not only is your attention on this feeling is suddenly, bam, the brick wall, but then you get frustrated with yourself for feeling it, and then you get frustrated with yourself for not knowing.
That's the downfall, is that that self criticism, which is different than the power of like a self critique and reviewing where you're at. But yeah, that total dread or loathing of like oneself.
Yeah.
That's where everything is just going to hell.
Yeah. Yeah. And then all the ugly comes out. Then it's just it happens.
Then
so
you spill your
fast.
beverage, and then the kid gets sick and you accidentally curse in front of them, and then
right.
Just a trail of
exactly,
of silly mistakes. So the thing there is that some intervention is necessary, even with as the understanding blossoms. That's why the practice of pranayama or different modes of fine-tuning our senses and finding our body to be a pleasant place to be in, or keeping good company with people that are on the same path, creating good habits like that, exposing ourselves to the teachings frequently. All these things together do help over time, and it does get easier. But it never loses its continual excitement and joy, because it doesn't get old ever. But there will be leaps where you don't fall back down. Like more of a like if you can imagine different platforms with little ladders in between them. There are times when you don't have to climb anymore and you can just rest there.
Right. Yeah. There's everything has a slope, like an upward slope. So you're always like kind of trudging uphill a little bit. And, you know, when you stop, you could slide back. But every once in a while you hit a really nice flat spot where you can just rest for a moment, however long it takes. You know? What I find, though, is that it kind of just like I feel so much of the time like I'm not consciously in charge of where I am on my path.
Huh.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm aware of it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's leading the way. So I've just kind of have to take like there's so much of the time when these experiences are happening or these, something is hitting new and different where I have to take such a back seat, like feeling legitimately I'm my hands are off the wheel in my own body,
Mm-hmm.
like just with everything, like just
Mm-hmm.
you watch, just sit back and watch.
Yeah.
And that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. In our tradition too, yeah, there comes a point in time where you just the scripture has something to say about you, and in all other pursuits of knowledge or any kind of knowledge making experience that you have, you keep your identity as the one who experienced it, the one who knows it, the one who had the experience. And so you always retain that sense of limited self, like as a knower, as an experiencer, as a doer. You retain that. But here, there's something being said about you, about that one, the truth of who that experiencer is. So there, you have to completely submit yourself to what it has to say. Open yourself to it. Keep an open mind. And fortunately, you don't have to blindly believe that. You just have to see it, if it's true, and expose yourself. So, yeah, I don't think there's a bad thing to be remaining as that witness. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Is the thing.
Right. Yeah, because it
which is different than for practical transactions taking responsibility for what you do. That can coexist with also being that witness.
How do you mean?
Like, you can take responsibility for the things that are happening in your life moment to moment, taking care of the kids, working on anything, like
Sure.
showing up for work on time
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, and being practical and reasonable. And that doesn't have to fall outside of having a kind of trustful surrender that things will work out, or a deeper level that you can remain as a witness to all of that. It's not that witness is not opposed to daily action.
Right.
In fact, it's more insights come when you do act.
Yeah.
One thing that made me think of too is that the surrender thing is that I think it's the Kata Upanishad. You were listening to that in this YouTube podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure in that Upanishad there's a mantra that says that the Atman, or the self, chooses you. And then I think in the same Upanishad it says you choose the Atman. Now that has to be explained a little bit, but one idea is that it's just a sudden awakening. Those flashes like you're talking about will come, just, and they seem like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Just based upon like what's happening, and you're reflecting on these, you're munching on these words.
It's just the perfect storm of something.
Yeah, exactly. It
Something
just feels like it's choiceless, like you were overwhelmed by it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes.
Yeah.
And then there's other times where you feel like you have to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. And I choose to be a joyous person in this moment.
Right.
So it can go both ways.
Yeah.
Everything I've studied, everything I've been learning, those flashes of experience tell me that who I am is a joyous person, that my nature is peace.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, that is not my experience. So I'm choosing,
right,
in spite of everything,
yep,
to not be drugged down by this.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes both ways.
And I think that's really important too, that you brought that up, the choosing. because that if ever there were an emergency giant red like override button, like
Mhm.
emergency stop, it's that reminder that
Yeah.
I have a choice. I
Mhm.
have a choice. If
I
I'm
think that's really important.
and it's you know, that's another one of those things. It's hard to remember. It can be really hard to remember in the moment.
Yeah. Mhm.
But again, finding that it comes more and more. It
Mhm.
happens naturally. You
Yeah,
know,
it
the more
will.
time you spend doing these things, these practices, the more.
That's why, yeah, you'll find people who still listen to Swamiji, and they've known him since they were a child,
Mhm.
and they still want to listen to this teaching because, yeah, for practical purposes, one, remembering that your nature's limitlessness and joy and happiness, that doesn't get old.
No.
It's so sweet to hear. Just keep telling me that.
Yeah.
One, but two, yeah, we were talking about last time we met about two, in terms of how the mind works, that that those notions about ourselves being opposed to that or contrary to that are deeply rooted, and those patterns are really deeply rooted,
Mhm.
and um, to I mean work within the field of mind, and those patterns, they will also take time for them to be corrected. I
Right.
guess those habits, just like anything, like you have a particular habit that it's not actually just like that. Um, always, some habits you can just drop, but
Yeah.
other habits, you have to spend some time skillfully watching how your desire for that thing, what is arising,
Mhm.
and then you have to spend some time working yourself back from that.
Yeah. Those habits. Those habits too. I also associate. I think and just with my loose interpretation of things, sometimes
Hmm.
I associate those things, a lot of those habits, those
Hmm.
really ingrained patterns, with just whatever the karma is that I have to work through this
Sure.
time around.
Hmm.
You know, for some reason in this life, in this iteration of myself, I, relationships, my personal relationships, my closest relationships, those have been my my most my deepest work. It feels like I'm here to address something about that
Hmm.
right now.
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of how I look at a lot of those ingrained patterns.
Yeah.
All those, a lifetime of thinking and acting and responding certain ways, that now that I'm aware of them and I see that's where the work needs to go,
Hmm.
you know. And I think that's yeah, there is a tremendous sense of freedom, I think, that comes from so much of this. But there is also that sense of responsibility. I do have work that I have to do. I
Hmm.
I do see things that need work, and I can clear, and the more I do that, the more I clear things away,
Yeah.
the less there is keeping me out of those sorts of states
Hmm.
of the, that expanded consciousness, or whatever
uh,
you want to call it. So there's less holding you down. And
yeah.
so I think that, looking at it karmically, I think kind of plays a big role in how I try to approach doing that work too.
Sure.
So, because it's just another fun way to look at it.
No,
You
I
can
think
look
it
at
all
it.
is. Yeah, all of it um, is karma, working with action,
Right.
and you're doing it skillfully now.
Try to. It's.
Creating new actions and then removing those causes,
Mm-hmm.
going back to trying to trace back the causes for why things are happening, or I guess tracing back for us is more just understanding them in the right place and not being disturbed by them.
Right.
But yeah, all of that makes you really reflective too, because you think about how, like you're talking about that karma and how your whole life, like up to this point, how it's unfolded. So much of that just took place pretty unconsciously, like in the childhood state.
Mm-hmm.
So it can make us feel really grateful that we had a childhood, that we did that wasn't like totally wrought with
Right.
endless trauma.
Right.
And
All right. Yeah.
because everyone experiences that trauma to a certain degree in those really young years that play a huge role in shaping us.
Uh-huh.
But
Dude, yeah, potty training causes trauma.
Yeah, I was just talking about this, and even in preschool,
mm-hmm.
feeling like you were abandoned by your mother, and it's in a very wordless, energetic way that you are no longer needed or wanted. But in the mother's mind, she's doing her best to set you up for life.
Yeah.
But in the child's mind, your everything suddenly gave you up.
Mm-hmm.
And sending you to some place.
Yeah. And
so
traumatically rips something open in you.
Yeah,
and then you're like, this sucks, and I'm gonna remember this somehow for the rest of my life. But you don't see that it's ripping that thing open for something else to grow, for something else to always come from that.
Yeah.
Too.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, but now all that healing can be done now in the light of discovering who you are.
Yeah.
And trusting in who you are.
In light.
In light. Exactly. It goes away.
In the light.
It dissolves in that light.
Yeah. Yeah.
That light embraces it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that memory can still be there, but it will be transformed in that light, or it won't weigh our minds down anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could be what enlightenment is. It's not blowing the mind away, but discovering yourself as light.
Yeah.
As the source of light.
Yeah.
And then the mind can enjoy that lightness.
Right. That's that freedom.
Yeah.
That comes from that.
Yeah.
Because there is, I do acknowledge my daily responsibilities and things like that. I have them. I commit to them. I handle them as responsibly as I can.
Good.
as an 8th grader in his mid-30s, but it's but there is still that sense of when I wake up in the morning, like I can still do what I have that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
That lightness, and that sort of that illuminated, that sort of subtle sense of illumination or whatever, where you could see things clearer. There's that really tremendous sense of freedom where I can wake up in the morning and be like, I'm gonna write a piece of music, or I'm going to, devote time to something creative, whatever I'm feeling at that moment, or I'm gonna do what I can do what I want, I could still, and it's cool. There is that real sense of like, there's no urgency. There's, I have my responsibilities and I can exist with them perfectly fine, perfectly peaceful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can still make music with plants,
Yep. Yeah. The neat thing too is if you actually look into that, like look into freedom, what does it mean? What does freedom really mean? That's something to reflect on too, because that inner freedom can be there even in the midst of this feeling of being totally free and peaceful within without having to change any of the like outward circumstances.
There are a lot of enlightened prisoners
There's good stories of that.
on
Yeah, there's
death row.
there's
Yeah,
yeah,
lots of stories that I mean, I've heard a few, some,
yeah.
but that's always amazed me.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody on death row knowing that they're going to, their time is at an end at the call, of the state, and by the call of the state, and they just come to they find a sense of peace.
Mm-hmm.
They find a sense of like, oh,
Uh-huh.
and that I think is really amazing.
Yeah.
Because those are the last people, I think,
It would.
your ego wants to look at you. I don't ever want to look at a convicted serial murderer on death row. I don't want to look at them as an enlightened teacher. That sucks. That feeling in my ego, like, ugh, why you? You're a heinous, hideous, awful monster.
Yeah, so there's the difference, though. They may not be fit to be a teacher and communicate this
Right.
effectively,
Right.
but that nobody's excluded from
Exactly.
who they are, essentially.
Right. There
So-
are no exceptions.
But yeah, I think, but it is true. I mean, every sinner can become a saint.
Yeah.
What is the saying? Every saint's got a past. Every sinner has a future.
Oh, that's cool. I don't know if
Yeah.
I've heard that. I like that.
But-
though.
Anyway, I don't see any sinners or saints. But the thing is about that is that everybody has the Indian wisdom tradition, and especially like the yogic tradition, says that you can craft your destiny, and that you as an independent, you have more and more agency than you think you do, more and more freedom to like totally change your perception of things, your day-to-day freedoms, like. So, I'm not sure how I got there, but the thing I was saying though is that serial killer definitely can have profound insights about who they are anytime, but they may not be qualified to communicate that effectively.
Right.
So
That's a powerful and important truth too.
mhm.
That it, and that right there gives me a sense of, I belong to it. Like if this thing can cut through all of my bullshit and can cut through all that serial killer's bullshit and everybody else's bullshit and still find a way to get your attention, to get you to understand it, like I belong to that.
In one Upanishad, they say that this awakening is like the striking of lightning. Like the whole, just in one go, everything is lit. When it's very dark, and in a city, if you can picture like a cityscape, everything's really dark, and then just with one bolt that comes down, the whole city is like,
Everything.
or whole valley is illumined. You see everything really clear. So that's what I trust, because I trust that there's no gap between that one and who we take ourselves to be. So it kind of goes back to that, like it chooses you or you choose it. Either way, it's instantaneous.
Yeah.
There's no time gap there.
Right.
So that means that it's available for anybody, be it a serial killer or someone that we consider saintly. And
Right. It's almost like, it's like two separate points that are for whatever reason seem to be disconnected. They're not, but they're both points kind of end up reaching for each other. and that it chooses you and you choose it, sort of a
Mm-hmm.
sense, I think.
Yeah. Yes, I think I am understanding what you're saying.
And that's kind of the waking up aspect too, where you realize, oh, it's not separate from me.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't. It's all, there's no separation from it.
Yeah, what you described is kind of like, okay, I think it was Ramakrishna, a great saint.
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he was the teacher and guru of Swami Vivekananda.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, he described this. I think it was him who described this as, like a magnet, two of the pieces of a magnet, those two poles that would be joined together, like the individual being one who is like imagining that magnet being like wrapped itself around a bunch of some kind of debris or something, like thread or whatever, and it lost its pole. But as it starts to take the initiative to unwind that and remove that, then effortlessly they join. They move together.
Right.
So it's like a joint thing, you and the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're talking about those two things coming together.
Right.
But there's something to be said about it not happening unless you take this first step, removing some of that.
Yeah.
So I guess even in the case of somebody who is the other thing too, I have to be really careful about that. I've read another great Swami who described it as somebody who had committed a crime or a killing or whatever, versus calling them an actual serial killer. Like that they just have, what is the word I'm looking for? They've just, from different events, like gotten themselves to a place where they have come to make like such actions. So, but labeling them as a killer, as a serial killer, doesn't really help. They just have been committed to crime, a life of crime.
Right.
So, and for a reason.
Mm-hmm. There is a reason why, and anything ends up where it is.
Yeah. But yeah, for somebody to have that breakthrough, I feel that there must, in their case, there had to be some kind of surrender or some kind of objectivity, something that induced them to be more and more objective, to just see like what's going on, like that removing of the removing the debris around the magnet, this feeling like probably in those last moments, like what really matters, or just asking those fundamental questions.
Yeah.
Is the removing of that.
The right questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who am I? What is, how did I get here? What does any of this mean? What is my purpose here? Can you help? It was a big one for me when when my moment sort of happened like that was but yeah, all of those questions where you stop, where you finally really, that sense of nothing out there is helping. Nothing out there is making me complete. Nothing outside of myself is completing the circle. I'm reaching for things. It always falls apart. It always, is there for a time. Then then it isn't. It's, or whatever happens. I don't find a sense of fulfillment. So where can I look? And, going inside with those fundamental questions, like who am I, for example?
Yes.
Like that, when you go deep enough, just kind of trying to get below all the chaos and all the noise, just to that spot where you're like looking for a peaceful place to ask your question, kind of. When you find that and you ask it.
The questioning, I think, is so important. That's too with the teacher and the student relationship too, is about this whole dialogue.
Yeah.
That the whole teaching unfolds through a dialogue, with, of course, the help of. The thing about the scripture is that, too, why it's important is because it's that dialogue is given a direction, and a very time-tested, peer-reviewed direction,
Right.
that's worked. But yeah, those questions really, asking the right questions can really open up
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of
Yeah.
inner discovery.
Right.
But that who question is the key one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who am I? Oh boy. That's a fun one. That's a really fun one.
Who? Yeah.
Yeah. It's when
I don't know if you'll find in that playlist the Kena Upanishad,
perhaps
because that Upanishad is this question. Kena means
there
by
is
whom.
one that I remember listening to
Yeah.
that was very heavily focused on that.
Yeah, Kena, that's the name Kena Upanishad comes from, that means by who Upanishad. So the Rishi begins with a certain premise that there's an intelligence by which, my eyes can see, my breath can move.
Mm-hmm.
By whom?
Right.
Who is that? So the who comes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that does sound familiar. That does sound really familiar.
It's my favorite Upanishad.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's the one that really struck me.
Do you recall the first time you actually sincerely asked that question? When you asked in a way where a little bit of the light shone through. Do you remember that?
I actually have a very vivid memory of when I had just enough exposure that it felt like that was really important to know. And I saw that there was something there in that question. But at that time, when I'm remembering, like the memory I'm having flash into my mind, I was really demanding an answer. And it was really strained to know.
Mm-hmm.
and asking in an intelligent way, and
very clumsy way.
Yeah, basically just crying.
Yeah.
and and
throwing a fit
and feeling really strained, and though it was sincere,
mm-hmm.
but yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Like, this is really important, but I felt there's no way to know.
Right.
But I needed to know. So anyway, that definitely shaped a lot of things that led me here.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Because
But I think what actually just happened is, like, I just collapsed. That, like, my memory is just of me crying. And
just being broken.
Yeah, feeling broken.
Being broken. Yeah. Not being, but feeling.
Yes.
Feeling that. Yeah, that's an important distinction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that because that's where mine was too, or in a similar state, but I equate the state that I was in to a hell. It was there was just despair,
Mm-hmm.
in my situation. But yeah, that moment of just no more fight left in me, feeling broken and just going and having that moment, that question, I think I attribute it so much to being in that mental state of, I give up,
Mm-hmm.
Then really starting to formulate that question, or just thinking about the question a little bit differently this time around.
Yeah, that's when it really happens, is because it's not possible to answer that in a disturbed state. But that disturbance, I feel like, is a kind of purging of the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and it's then the mind becomes more quiet, and then the question can really then the question really starts to reverberate.
Mm-hmm.
And
you just get that immediate sense of, I'm asking the right question.
Mm-hmm.
That took me a while to notice that, but that because it's very subtle. But there are indicators, like, the universe or God or whatever. It's just like, you got it. You got it. Keep going. You know, those when you ask the questions in the right way.
Yeah.
It feels like.
Yeah.
Because, and that's really, that's where I get excited because there is, you know, like I come here and we have these conversations, and then I take away whatever I meant to take away. I feel like, but you know, there's no real. I mean, I call you my teacher, but there's no guru. You know, I don't spend time with a guru or anything like that. So there really hasn't been anything other than just a growing awareness and experience, but realizing the importance of how you ask a certain question, or how you know, like a question, but then how you can sometimes answer the question, or that the answer comes in a way that might be a little bit different, but it's, you know, that like that has been really crazy, and it's really hard to describe too, but how to ask, you know, like how to ask, like, because the question, who am I?
Yeah, see, with that question, it's unique in that you any answer that you receive back is not it. Because
I get it.
You know,
I understand. Yeah.
Like,
I get it. Yeah.
as soon as you get a response, you've limited yourself.
Uh-huh.
That's why we use the wisdom of the scripture, because that question can never be okay, because you're asking the question and now you're going to answer it. So you're the ignorant one who doesn't know, and you're asking who that one is. How do you break that?
Right.
That's why they say go to the guru.
Right.
Not to mean that you have to, and that whole thing I feel like is something I will be spending a lot of time in my life clearing up, is this relationship between the teacher and the guru, because it's wrongly understood. The guru's not going to do everything for you and give you some show, and then I just feel it's really wrong. It's really misunderstood relationship. And the guru wants you to be independent and abide in who you are without their help, and without them, you know. They don't actually. I feel that a true guru doesn't really see you as separate from themselves. So there's no like hierarchy like that. It's a very unique relationship, but still, this conundrum of asking somebody ignorant of who they are, asking who they are. How is that?
Yeah.
That's why the stories come of like, you just be silent.
Yeah. I mean, things will come. Things will come in that silence, but trusting that.
Yeah, the silence. You know, it's true.
Especially with such big questions. Damn. If I'm asking myself a question like, what does anything in my life mean? What does any of this mean? That's a big question. Do I want to sit in silence with that question? That's uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're right. Like, that's just an art in itself. Even if you don't get some specific answer in that question, the willingness to look at it and to pose it without immediately trying to cover it up. Like you said, it's really uncomfortable because what we're accustomed to doing is never asking that and never just sitting with it, and instead trying to find a solution to that, or fix it, or like create some like diversion from really wanting to know the answer. So yeah, I think there's just beauty in being really open to ask that question and then just sitting with it.
Yeah, yeah. And is that sitting with it? I remember that being a struggle at first.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was being able to sit with questions, because there were these moments where it was just like that sort of explosive bolt of lightning, that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's where I would light bulbs would go off and things would click and I would sort of understand things or see things a bit clearer.
Uh-huh.
And but then there was that part of me that knew that those, experiencing something like that
Mm-hmm.
was probably, like I had no idea how it happened. I was just like sitting there thinking about things, and then all of a sudden, oh, and but then sitting with those questions, and one of the first things that kind of hit me after a little bit of time, because there were a lot of questions that I had for sure, and one of the things I remember was sort of this thought of on at the particular level you're looking at this, the particular way you're looking at this, you'll have no choice but to get comfortable with not knowing.
Mm.
So when I sort of saw that, it was like, well, how am I looking at this? And then that's kind of where I would notice things sort of starting to unfold a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
It's just that realization. You got to be okay with not knowing the answer, especially if you're thinking about it or looking at it like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where that sort of thing came from. It just popped in there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I just think that the beauty in that is it makes you really alert in like a relaxed way of what just is, what's going on moment by moment. And then I feel that you see a lot of beauty in that. Like just being more and more objective and just observing things for what they are.
Yeah.
Without coloring them with our different, like, what we think it should be or should not be. So, yeah, that could be what's happening. Just like with that question that doesn't have an answer, you just become really alive to what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever gotten a good answer for who am I?
That
has one where you've been like, at least an answer that's given you the idea of like, oh, okay, maybe that's like I see a bit more of that, like, or something about that particular answer that hit you a bit harder. Because any answer is limiting. I get that.
Sure. No.
No? Not even the good old I am?
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's a perfect answer,
actually,
in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
But it doesn't...
But then who's saying that?
Yeah, see, that you watch...
Who's saying I am?
There's no answer there.
Right.
Except... That's why... But the Upanishad is a... We take this Upanishad and this Vedanta as a means to know that answer. Because there's a certain acceptance in that there's no other way to know.
Mm-hmm.
There's not available for me to know like any other thing. It's not available for me to have an experience of, because it's the truth of the experiencer. It's not available for me to infer, which is based upon my direct experience. And all other means of knowing are just not available anymore to answer that. So then there's a negative method of recognizing. I start to gain more and more depth as I realize that if I observe something, then I can't be that. So I start to become more of an observer with reference to my body, with reference to my physiology, with reference to my emotions, my cognitions and things like that. I observe them. And I even observe that thought I that keeps popping up.
Mm-hmm.
That's also seen. So then, yeah, there just comes a time of being quiet and still. And then that, I would say, is the ending of all effort. Remaining as that watching one.
Yeah.
No effort there.
None
Needed.
None at all,
And
man.
there's incredible peace in that.
It's
But to know,
straight up chill time.
but to break, yeah, to break
great.
that silence, and to answer that question, we take the Upanishad and see what it has to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens to say that you're the whole.
Yeah.
that actually, what seems to be seemingly limited by my own faculties, like my own ability to observe my mind and my body and all of that, it seems that I can't put any defining boundary on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But Upanishad says that the truth of that is that the truth of who you are as that witness is actually Brahman, is actually God,
Mm-hmm.
which manifests as the entire universe.
Yeah.
Which is a really big deal.
One of the sort of ideas that I got from the Upanishads,
Mm-hmm.
because I've listened to a reading a couple of times at work. I think like 2 or 3 times at this point, but it's sort of the general vibe of it is it's all this thing, and it's also all this opposite thing, and it's also all none of it. Is pretty much just that general vibe that I got. But no matter what, it all is.
Yeah, there's an interesting relationship there. Like, there's these categories that we have to understand that Upanishad will present them. It's that there's one is called Satya, which means that which never changes, or Satya also means truth.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a definition of that, which means that which doesn't change in any period of time, past, present, future, or any state, waking, dream, deep sleep. Is there anything that is unchanging? So that makes you reflect.
Mm-hmm.
What's changeless,
right,
and what is changing? And
big one that comes to mind is birth, life, death.
yeah, exactly. Body goes through
Mm-hmm.
those changes.
Yeah.
You exist as maybe a cell in the mother's womb or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then you exist in the womb, and then you're born, then you begin to grow and mature and decay and die.
Yeah.
And then, so, okay, that's one biography of me, but is there anything other part of me that's more lasting? And similarly, when you look around the world, I mean, if you just observe more, you feel like there has to be something changeless that's supporting the continual flux of things or change of things that I'm witnessing. But yeah, what is the relationship between that changeless one and of course Upanishad says yes, there is something that's changeless. So then you feel, whew,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, at least they say there's something like that.
There's some solid ground to stand
Yeah,
on.
exactly, because I was feeling everything just slipping on my feet.
Yeah.
Like this big pit I was falling into.
Right.
So, but Upanishad has that very consoling and sweet statement that says, yes, there's something changeless. It's called Brahman. Don't worry, my dear.
Yeah.
And then that in itself perks your ears and gives you this shine, like, I want to discover that. But the thing I was saying is about, like, you're talking about it's this and it's also that, but it's none of it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very important clarity that has to come about. What is the relationship between what's changeless, Sat, and what is, in Advaita Vedanta at least, we call what is mithya, which doesn't mean unreal, but it means what appears and disappears. What is changing, ability for you to measure and dissect and understand through different tools, but it's not ultimately real in the sense that it's changeless.
Right.
What is the relationship between that changeless being and this changing phenomenon? So Satya and Mithya. And it's like the way that we describe, one of the best examples I found that describes this is something like a clay and pot. So pot is a particular name and that's ascribed to clay. But when you want to know what the truth of a pot is, though it has some function and utility, if you look at a clay pot, you will find, okay, where is the pot? Is it on the clay? Or is it in the clay? Or around the clay? Or whatever. But when you look into it more, you find that when I look at the pot itself, I'm looking at the clay.
Mm-hmm.
When I want to know what the pot is, it is nothing but clay.
Right.
So the clay is the Satya. That's the truth. But the pot happens to be a temporal name and form that we ascribe to that
Right.
truth. But the thing that's beautiful about that is that the clay can be the same, but then we may use another name or form. It may take another name or form, like vase or
plate. Yeah.
Exactly. But then when you look in, I want to know what the truth of that plate is. In this case, I want to know the truth of anything that I perceive, any object I perceive. When I look into it deeper, I find that it's nothing but clay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a special relationship.
Yeah.
Like it's because you originally said it's this. So it's a first statement. It's this. Okay, that means that yes, the pot is essentially that. Yeah, it's the truth of the truth of it is clay. But then it's also that. Yes, it's also the clay, which is transcendental. And it's none of it, meaning that there's nothing but the clay. Right. Actually, essentially.
Yes.
So
yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter what form it takes, what shape it takes. It's all just clay.
Yeah.
It's all. Yeah. Yeah, and that's crazy stuff when you start peeling back those layers.
Mm-hmm. It is.
You know?
It is.
What is the pot? It's clay.
It's magic.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. Mithya is magic. For something to appear and in so many endless names and forms, but essentially not have any real existence. There's a way we describe this where it is asadbhyam anirvachaniyam, which means that you cannot say that it exists and you cannot say that it does not exist. That is a special category of things. It's not available really for categorical thinking like we're used to.
Yeah.
Which is the way that our ancients understood the world.
Mm-hmm.
They understood it as that, like shadow play, or a hologram or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That you experience it, yes,
mm-hmm.
and that it has an experiential existence, but essentially is
it just rises up out of formlessness and falls back down into it, rises and falls in and out of formlessness. It's sort of like the corniest way to look at it is like dolphins, just jumping out of the water, things like that. So that's just kind of what it all is, what everything is.
So yeah, like the example, like to refine that example, that we also talk about it as like the ocean and like an ocean, like the waves that arise in that and fall. And the ocean always seems separate. Ocean here could mean the creator, always seems separate from the wave, or the various many, many waves, like many, many individuals. But when you want to look into the truth of it, it's all water.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that huge tidal wave. Wow. a god, and then small froth and foam, a name some small creature.
Yeah, little old me.
Yeah, little me, exactly. But then I want to know who I am.
Right.
And then as you keep going, or you're talking about like peeling back those layers, what you keep finding is that in and through is just water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I think it's a funny.
which doesn't destroy the uniqueness of those ripples and waves or anything.
No.
They can exist there without essentially changing.
Yeah. They're fine. They're great. They're perfect.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, I was just having the funny mental image of somebody just becoming very inquisitive of themselves and standing in water and going like, what is all this? And then trying to like move aside water to look deeper into water to figure out what it all is.
Uh-huh.
It was just kind of hit me. I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. But
I do think it is really fascinating, like kind of piggybacking off that idea is the pursuit to know what is in terms of outside of our body and know what is the truth of the world, like through the scientific means. I think that's a really interesting thing. If how far you can go before you would come back upon yourself. Like, it's interesting to know anything. There's a conscious observer, you, and the thing that you're observing. But what's always hidden there is you. Like your mind observing some phenomenon outside, but then the truth of the observer themselves is always missed. But I feel that some really interesting insights are being said about like the universal, like pursuing understanding of like scientifically what is said about the universe. That's very much in alignment with what some of the scriptures or sages are saying, with like the momentariness of things or the changing nature of things, or essentially like the emptiness of matter.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that you can scientifically see that now,
Right.
more than before.
Yeah.
Or like the like inherent randomness in things, like at more core level. That's like a whole nother discussion I'm not very educated in, but are things like purposeful or are they random? That's a question that people are asking, like, because it's like we're talking about importance questions. Some question people are approaching this like question like, what is the point? What is the meaning of all this? Like, that's another kind of question.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Is it the randomness thing? I don't think I've ever really thought about that. I mean, maybe in passing a little bit, just like, things kind of seem random, but also
yes.
they don't,
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I think that
that might be one.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think because some of the sciences, which I'm just speaking about something that I'm really unaware about and haven't studied properly, but I have been told that as you are looking into, like, scientifically, if you're like looking into the material world, that when you get down to a certain deeper level, that there's just no pattern anymore. Like, patterns and things break down, and it seems inherently random. So that would lead one to feel like, well, what's the purpose of this? And and then if you try
a cosmic fluke.
Yeah. If you try to apply that, like if you try to make a philosophy out of that and then apply that to your daily living, then it can lead to some confusion. Like, I think it can just lead to dread. Like a feeling like there's nothing.
Bleakness.
Yeah, like there's nothing. What's the point of it all? But yeah, different philosophers and great thinkers have different answers for that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think at least when it comes to just like everyday phenomena too, just things that we experience in our lives, that randomness could easily just be attributed to just that randomness could be just awareness. How aware you are of your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, the energy you're putting out,
Mm-hmm.
the energy you're taking in,
Mm-hmm.
how that all happens through you, that every single thing, if there is any amount of energy that exists, it's going to transform into another form of energy. It's going
Mm-hmm.
to, like energy will just keep turning in, keep
Mm-hmm.
changing, but continuing. Um, and so having that awareness that, oh, things can seem random if I'm not really in tune with my practices or myself
Yeah,
or
I see
whatever.
what you're saying.
But the more I am, the more I can, you know, sort of see the process a bit clearer with more space going, like talking about that space from earlier, that inner space. You can see it from that with a bit more space,
Mm-hmm.
and you can have a deeper understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't alleviate that feeling of like, oh, it's all entirely random, or it doesn't relieve you of that, that feeling of randomness or whatever,
Uh-huh.
you know it does help you understand it, so you see maybe it's not quite as random
Yeah,
as I thought it was.
I think that's the healthiest approach because, in my experience, the more awareness or the more awareing that's there, the more that you see the connections of things and the meaning. You're able to make meaning out of what was a seemingly random event
Mm-hmm.
happenstance in your life. And I think that that's a healing experience.
Yeah.
To be able to see the like I was talking about earlier, even with our anger, that it's not out of place in the sense that you're not messed up, or you're not
I'm not broken
yeah, I'm not
because
broken or
I'm
something because I
angry.
have an emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, there's a cause that I
Mm-hmm.
can um I there's a cause that I may be able to trace back, and there may not be I may not have the ability to trace that all the way back and understand its roots, but I'm starting to see that there's a connection there, and there comes the more of the feeling of trustfully surrendering and feeling like there's an order to things. So, um, yeah, the universe does have an order. We see that, and there's many different forms of order that we find.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as you go deeper, it's interesting to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, that'll be all right. That's a good
Maybe
conversation.
I think that's a good place to stop.
We could stop right there too. There was a because that's a solid conversation.
I think so too.
Unpacking just chaos, chaos and randomness.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll address that next time.
Let's sit on that for a week. So,
All right.
all right. Well, thank you all for listening. We'll be back.